Data Day Wednesday, and 'tis the season to be thinking of next season, and 'tis the show to learn all about what happened this year and what's going to happen next year.
Let's go.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
I should have had my Santa hat on for that one because that was all about 'tis the season. I was all, Dean, when you sent me the message yesterday saying this is what we're going to talk, I was like, oh, how can I tie it into Christmas? And I had some song said, and I figured if I sang, everybody would hang up before the show even started. So I just was like, forget about it. We're gonna dive into 'tis the season.
Tis the season.
Tis the season, my friend. But lots of great things to talk about today. A few announcements we have today as well. And I'll start with one really big one for y'all. So on December 13th, we're doing an all-day marathon stream, 9 till 4 p.m. 4 p.m. The last expert's going to come on. We are going to have, as of right now, close to 13 experts coming on: sales, strategy, mindset, finances, the works. And the big thing that we just figured out 2 days ago was our main man, Dean, the IQ show, the DAT IQ show, is actually going to be streamed through our channel as well on that Tuesday, the 13th. So, Dean, we are really looking forward to that, brother. It is going to be an epic event of just great. So, all y'all, December 13th, mark it on your calendars. No sales calls. Stop moving freight. Yeah. Okay, Dan. Just be here. We are gonna have an absolute blast. Good morning to you, Daman. Good morning, Rob. Good to see you back again this morning. Lisa, good morning. Good to have you back. And Jenny, good to see you. All right, everybody. Let's talk about the Four Seasons of Freight, Dean.
Yeah, one of the things that's been absent in the last 2 years, I think, is seasonality. And I'm glad Jeff's on the call today because I think it's we've sort of returned to it. The market has been, and the spot market more in particular is what we're talking about. And I think the reason it's a good subject, Dan, is a lot of new folks to the industry might not have seen seasonality. If they're new to the industry in the last 2 years, it's been anything but. What I've seen in the spot market data is the market's been trying, there's been this inertia, it's been trying to exert seasonality, but it just can't quite get its act together. And the thing that stuck out this week was seasonality emerged. Sorry, last week's data, seasonality emerged for the first time in a definite observable way in the spot market. But it was very subdued compared to other peaks. Normally around Thanksgiving, you see a big hit in the spot market load posts in flatbed. Well, flatbed not so much, but mostly reefer and dry van. We saw it this year, but at a much lower amplitude when you look at our spot market charts on our show yesterday.
Before we go any further, for everybody watching, share with them why it would be reefer that would spike at this specific time of year.
Yeah, so turkeys. So turkey season coincides with fall produce season. Christmas tree season's peak shipping week. Just before Thanksgiving is peak shipping season for Christmas trees that have to be in parking lots last Monday, Cyber Monday. So what you see in places like Oregon, which is the number one producer of pines, it also coincides with fall produce for apples, pears, onions out of Yakima Valley, Columbia River Basin, et cetera, et cetera. You see the same out of Quebec and the Maritimes where you're from. Good friends of mine are pulling a lot of loads out of Nova Scotia right now, out of Sydney, right up in Nova Scotia, all the way down here into Massachusetts, New Jersey, flatbeds, drop deck flatbed. They've got everything loaded with Christmas trees. So capacity tightens to a degree, but mostly in refrigerated because it's fall produce. The other area is the second biggest producer of Christmas trees is North Carolina. It's also where all the sweet potatoes come from. It's the biggest. Eastern North Carolina is where it's the home to sweet potatoes. And of course, we use a lot of sweet potatoes at Thanksgiving. So again, Christmas trees, all that stuff. So you just see in those regional markets, that's why it's really important to, the adage is no one's home at the average. So when you look at average rates across the country, it's hard to get a sense of where the opportunities are, where there's slack in capacity or tightness in capacity. So you've got to really go down to the market level. And that's why we see capacity tighten for refrigerated carriers in certain markets each year at this time of the year. Seasonality is basically what do we expect to happen each year at the same time because of things that drive demand. So that's why we see now. To your point, I looked at our data going back 7 years, maybe it was 6 or 7, including this year. And we covered this a little bit last week, but the numbers are final. We normally see a 13 cents a mile increase in reefer rates, spot rates from 111. Sorry, that would be 11.1 here, all the way up to Thanksgiving. And this year it was 2 cents a mile. So seasonality was there, but, and this is what's very important for everybody listening to understand, is it's not so much about demand at the moment. We've got so much capacity. That's what's having the biggest impact on rates. We've got overcapacity across the board, and that's what's really depressing spot rates for carriers at the moment. There's just too many trucks for loads. That said, there's been a lot more volume, of course, moving in the contract market because rates are higher. So, back to the seasonality to talk about, if rates normally go up 13 cents a mile in Thanksgiving, before Thanksgiving, they went up go back to July 4. We were on the show. Remember I said normally rates go up, I think it was about 12 cents a mile. I think
they went up 3 or something.
Yeah. So July, the second season of the year is produce season. It was like a small mound rather than a peak, because produce volumes were way down, driven by the drought in California. So again, the seasonality that we'd normally see around July 4 is this, sort of peak in dry van and reefer rates. Yep. In July 4 never materialized. And this year in Thanksgiving, it didn't materialize again, but you could see the seasonality start to emerge again. So, seasonality is one of those things where there's a material change in volumes driven by, demand. And that's why I think it's important to, we're in the fourth season of the year, which is retail shopping season, I think they call it. Yep. It hasn't been a peak. Like everybody's been talking about a non-existent peak because it was more like a plateau. So again, peak season hasn't really been there on the freight side. But what's happening is I think we're about to head into the quiet season. I think they call it the quiet season. Am I right, Jeff? What's the
I call it the dead zone. It's usually
the quiet season.
February, March.
January to March, right? So think about we've had this real whiplash, bullwhip effect, right? We've had pandemic, over ordering, inventory stocked up, way too much inventory. We're about to head into the quiet season, which is when Chinese New Year happens, imports tail off, imports are going to drop right up until March, and then they typically pick up again into the spring. So what you've got right now on ships that are coming in is spring inventory. Not holiday season inventory, right? So that's why a lot of the talk about the rail market is interesting. We had Lee Klasko from Bloomberg on yesterday, and he kind of agreed with our assessment that a lot of volume that's moving on the rails now, that freight of all kinds category, is most likely inventory for next season. And I have a sense that could sit in the supply chain a little bit longer. There's not as much urgency. I may be wrong on that. So I think where we're at right now, we've got a little bit of seasonality emerging around Thanksgiving. Our forecast rates have rates picking up towards the end of the year. Again, that's what we normally expect. But the quiet season next year, I think, is really going to be a tough time for everybody because volumes are going to slow right down. We've got, inflation still running high, albeit easing. Consumer confidence pretty low. I suspect a lot of people will tighten their belts in the Q1 of next year. We're still going to have a lot of trucks looking for freight. And that's why we think the bottom of the market is the end of Q1, the start of Q2, which then leads into that summer season, which generally produce season lifts everybody up. So, the first quarter of next year is the quiet part of the year. It's when flatbed carriers are hauling a lot more lumber, though, to get it ready for spring. So, the peak in steel production and machinery haulage is March, ahead of planting season and construction season. So there's a lot of seasonality that goes on in the freight market every year that you've got to be aware of. And you've got to think about, the quiet season, January to March. Produce season is really April to July. Peak shipping is typically August to October. It'll be interesting to see if that emerges next year. And of course, the holiday shipping season is November through January, adding in that there are, you've got return season. So, think about seasonality. It's important to understand what drives the market. We've got a lot of capacity at the moment. You've just had Hurricane Ian whip through Florida, and that has delayed the start of next year's produce season. Because even though the volumes are low and down about I looked at the USDA data yesterday. The number of truckloads coming out of Florida are down 53% compared to this time last year. So Hurricane Ian has really delayed and damaged the winter veggie crop, and it's delayed the start of the next sort of the summer start to the produce season, which is essentially strawberries, blueberries, things like that in Lakeland. So again, if you sort of, I've always been an advocate that for carriers in particular, you've got to study the demand for what you haul, right? It's
well,
like,
and not only that, Dean, there's I believe there's a flip side to it. And as a professional and as somebody that, if you're working for a company or you're working for yourself, you obviously want to be as profitable as you can all year round. So
right.
if your business is not diversified, like right now, road salt is going crazy.
Yeah.
Right. So and road salt will go crazy, especially in the northern climate, all the way till March, because we're going to consistently use it. Right. So if your business has materials or products that typically, like retail, for example, retail dies right off in January. If it has,
right.
I mean, it's dying off as it is, which is funny because you hear a lot of people say, "Oh no, malls are super packed," but you drive by them, and I don't know about you guys, but here they're not. But it's like, so you have that. If your business is diversified enough, and if you understand what Dean was talking about these seasonalities and what's shipping high volume now versus 3 months from now, and you plan ahead. You can actually have rock star years, and your January, February, March could be booming because you're in the right industry for January, February, March, right? Like,
you're right,
and that's the big thing.
Right. And there are two things that come to mind on this is that on the seasonality, not just Thanksgiving where you have the turkeys and hams, also Christmas. You got to take that into consideration too, that there's a lot of turkeys and hams that are needed for Christmas. Now, I'm not really sure because the numbers aren't out right now, but Black Friday and Cyber Monday, I really want to see what those numbers are because that's pretty much going to dictate what the return season is going to look like in January. Now, if it's really, really dull and it really didn't hit those numbers, that's going to affect the inbound on returns during that January to March year. So
when do you get those numbers, Dean?
About what those numbers are. I don't think it's going to happen right now, would you?
No. And National Retail Federation tracks them. There are some companies that track returns. It's mostly going to be an LTL phenomenon, I think.
Consolidation.
Jeff, But I noticed I read the story last week that companies are preparing for a big whiplash effect this year and applying charges to returns for the first time. So
I read that too.
I was thinking about that the other day. That would make me a little bit more cautious or a little bit selective about, trying to pick a triple XL versus a double XL shirt.
Well, Ryan said it last week, right? He says, how many of us do we get 3 of the same thing, knowing when we buy it, we're going to return 2 because it's free. Well, not to mention it, you can buy it for free shipping, right? And then you get free returns.
Right.
I mean, I personally have never done that. But I know a lot of people that do it.
But but let's face it, right? Think of that term, free shipping. Listen, nothing is for free, right? Nothing is free. And it's like Walmart, okay? So when Walmart goes out and they procure their products, they buy it in bulk and it drives their prices down, right? So even if they put their profit on top of that, which is a lot less than other
Walmart's at 50%.
Right. Compared to their competitors. That transportation cost is built in the cost that they sell it for. It's not free. They're figuring that all out, but it's just a gimmick for you to buy more, because of that free returns, but it's all built in there. We know it. We know how to do that.
There's OS&D and there's that. Like if you sell to Walmart, Walmart actually puts that back on you. And I know because when I had a product that I was looking to get into Walmart and they wanted 50% margin. So if they sell it for $10, they got to buy it from you for $5, and you have to have 8% OS&D built in. And so, because when they return, they'll just give the customer a new one or whatever, and they'll send it back to you and you got a refund. And same thing with Costco. Costco, I think, was 38%, and it was like a 5 or 6% OS&D.
All the big box dealers do that.
Yeah, all of them. because they don't lose. They're like the casinos in Vegas. They don't lose, man.
They don't. But the uneducated consumer out there thinks that they're getting a really good deal, but when you really look into it and dive into it, they're paying for those returns. They just don't realize.
Did I tell you guys about the what I did last year for Prime Day for my Inception members? What I did is I bought a bunch of products I wanted just before Prime Day. And then on Prime Day, I looked at the same products. And it was funny because out of the 8 products, 6 of them were increased cost. So like if I paid $115 for it, it was like $145 minus $30. So it kind of came to that same price. But it's that, oh my God, you get $30 discount on it. It must be a great deal. And I actually showed the Inception members. I said, you see, when promos are on, we get this in our head. It's a promo. It's a promo. It's a promo. Like when you think about avocados for Super Bowl, right? Like there's always this big push. Dean, it's almost its own season. The avocado moves for Super Bowl, right? So it's like this big push on avocados. But if you take avocados from 3 months prior, they're more expensive at Super Bowl. They just mark it up and then they say, oh, well, we're going to give you a discount and bring it back down. And it's a game that works, and it works good. I mean, you look at all these stores that have, a $200 TV, and you go in to get the TV, but you end up spending another $700 on some other crap that you really didn't need, right? And it's it's crazy.
It's really funny because Costco, and is a great example. Their rotisserie chickens that they sell at a loss for the simple reason that it gets consumers to come in. And once they're in the door, they know they're going to make it up on the back end. But it's a fact that there are rotisserie chickens out there that you get such a deal on it. They know that you're going to spend more money when you're in there. So it's
interesting.
It's that.
Jeff, have you ever worked with a client where you broke even on one lane just to get another lane where you made mint on?
Exactly.
Right? Like think about it. I don't know how many times I've gone in and I've said, Dan, $300 will get it, and 300 is my cost. And I go, okay,
right,
I'll take that, but you got to give me something else because I'm losing here. But you got to give me something where I'm going to win. Well, I'll give you this one and this one. Okay, so I walk out with one at cost, and I walk out with 2 at very profitable. To me, that's a win. And I think most companies operate under this.
Yeah, I was going to say that I talked about this once before about reps that came in and they said, you know what, we're going to complement the account. We're going to take this Upper Peninsula Michigan lane at a loss. All right, what's your OR? 114%. It's like, but wait a second, that's not a good deal for me, because when you look at the revenue, the lanes, everything that we're doing, it's costing me more to give you that lane because you're losing it, and it affects everything that you do. So it's like, don't take it. I don't want you to complement my account. I'll find that niche carrier to handle that specific lane. Let's concentrate on the other one, because it's going to affect your discounts when you look at the whole ball of wax, man. So it's the same kind of deal, to a certain degree.
So one of the, I think we should start a GoFundMe page for Jeff to get a new router and internet thing.
Oh, did I go out then?
No, you froze for about half of it, but that's okay. But I think we're going to do a GoFundMe page because Jeff doesn't seem to want to spend the coin to go do that.
I'm going to get these guys in the next couple of weeks. I really am.
Next couple of weeks. Your internet's been going out for months.
So another example of your point about consumers and the chicken and the hot chook analogy. I love that one because it's a bit like my wife saying, goes and buys $1,000 worth of stuff and says, but it was 50% off. And you kind of laugh and think, I'm not sure I follow the logic, but a friend of mine runs.
Any man does, Dean.
Yeah, a friend of mine is running. A friend of mine runs 6 refrigerated vans out of Maine, and he's up and down 95 corridor all the time. He's got prime contract work out of Presque Isle, Maine. You've got Cavendish Farms, McCain's up there, a lot of frozen French fries. So if you've ever been to Presque Isle, Maine, you're only going there for one thing. Like, you're so far north, you're almost on the border. In fact, you are on the Canadian border, and that's so it's hard to get equipment in there. It's prime contract work for him on the southbound lane into the processing plants when he's bringing fresh spuds down to, say, North Carolina. So on the back haul, though, he can go to the spot market and haul for a lot less. A lot of people say, how can carriers get by on average line haul rates of $1.77 or $1.50 a mile? Well, it's the same analogy as the chicken in the supermarket, the hot rotisserie chicken. He can come south for $5 a mile out of Presque Isle, Maine without any problem, because he's got dedicated capacity, but he can run back for $1.50 a mile really easily. So I think that's the thing that a lot of folks miss when it comes to spot market analytics, is it carriers that are all in the spot market. Of course, they've got to be very, very selective if that's where you're looking for capacity. But for a lot of carriers, they always have a mix of contract and spot freight. And that's where you've got to be working with your carriers. You asked about what else can you get, that you might say, well, I can get you, I've got to pay this rate to get back north, but coming back south, here's what I can do for you on that lane. Because for carriers, it's not about the rate per mile for the load. It's about for the total average rate per mile for all miles round trip. That's the key. A lot of people kind of get lost in that.
Well, at Transcend, when we did a lot of work with Dell Computer, Microsoft, Apple, all Hewlett Packard, all the big kind of technology companies. And we were running out of Ontario at some points 80 cents a mile. And our round trip was still over $6. And it's when you look at it, a lot of companies were like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what are you doing? You're ruining the rate. And it's like, no, listen, I have 15 trucks a day I need in Nashville and Austin. So I have 30 trucks a day. I must move. I get killer rates coming out. I don't need $9 a mile round trip and work for 2 years and retire, but I can afford to go down for 90 cents a mile. And it was an interesting dynamic when you really start looking at that piece, right? And that's why people say it. When people had freight to Tennessee, brokers knew it all the time. You got freight to Tennessee, call Jesse or Dave or the team at Transcend, or John, the team at Transcend. Call Malati at Transcend, because it was like, yeah, no problem. 90 cents to $1 a mile. We'll go down for you all day long. And not only that, you get team service for that price, right? Like, so that was just our niche. That was our corridor. And we were the best at it. And this is where, as a broker, you got to line those people up. Because if you have freight going somewhere and they need the freight going there, like your supplier, your partner, your carrier needs a freight going somewhere, and that matches, that becomes like my relationship with Transcend became a lifelong relationship.
Yeah.
Very simple.
It's like what Dean was just saying about Maine, not much freight. Well, there's a great carrier out there that I use called Hart Transportation. They're right out of Bangor, Maine. Those are the kind of niche carriers that you look for those god-awful places where they'll get you out of there, but they have freight coming back, because that's where they're profitable lanes to go and move. So, that's just a quick example of those areas.
I got another one for you today, because I've been looking at rates coming southbound out of Seattle, right? Dry van rates out of Seattle. So it's always a backhaul market. That's part of the reason that a lot of imports have been coming into the Pacific Northwest, because it's a backhaul market and you can bring imports in, stage all of your retail freight in those warehouses and get it out of there pretty cheap, same as Phoenix. So southbound rates out of out of Seattle to Los Angeles, it's 1,135 miles. Are only 92 cents a mile. Northbound from Los Angeles to Seattle, $3.06. So that's excluding fuel, right? Yeah. So excluding fuel. So if you're getting the fuel surcharge, obviously it's a lot better. So for the 2,270 miles round trip, and I guess that's probably going to take you 5 days to do that round trip. So it's probably a week up and back. 2,270 miles, $4,500 revenue, $2 a mile average for every mile I travel. So
if you don't get fuel, if you get fuel,
right.
even better.
So not stellar rates, but I'm above break even at $2 a mile running on that lane. I'm probably making 30 cents a mile if I own my own truck and don't have finance payments. If I've just bought a truck for double what I should have and it got $30,000 a month insurance, I'm probably only just breaking even, maybe losing some money on that lane. I've got to be very careful about, not speeding and not burning too much time unloading and loading. I certainly can't get held over in Seattle. I have to get out of there quickly. And that's what a lot of carriers aim for, right? So you're talking about Hart Transport and all of these guys. They probably don't leave Bangor, Maine without a load back. It's a bit like your guys in Canada, Dan, and Damon's guys that are running into the US. They don't leave until they've got a load back home. In most cases. Yeah.
Something that's a great point, Dean, and that's truly about collaboration. What you're talking about, profitability and everything. If you can just understand, you're a shipper or a freight broker, understand how those carriers work and the shippers work with the carriers. It's going to help you reduce your cost immensely if you can keep these guys moving, like you said, Dean. How long they're at a dock. All these other problems they have on the road real fast. It's going to help you out. So it's a great point.
Well, especially and then have the conversations about seasonality with them and are they involved in it? Because a lot of the melons and a lot of the onions and stuff can move in vented dry vans if they need to. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well,
because they're all moved in Gaylord anyway.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, most brokers don't think the dry van market will get sucked in, but it gets sucked in huge. And when you think about it, so and anyway, this is more back when these peak seasons were actually peak seasons. But I remember melon season out of Georgia. If you thought you could find a dry van for less than like $3 a mile, $4 a mile to come to Canada, you were laughed at, no matter who it was. And that's why if you had a steady stream of freight out of there all year round, the conversation has to happen. And you have to say, listen, like, this is all year round. I understand you have melons. Are you involved in it? Yes, we are. Okay. What is the balance? And I even sat down with some of my suppliers and I said, listen, I get it. You're involved in melons. I'm giving you 52 weeks a year of freight and you're going to take it for 3-4 weeks of melons. I said, if I lose that capacity, I'll go to somebody else. So I want to work a deal out. So I think we worked it out to an extra $25 a load all year round. And they didn't need to go into the melon market to raise that extra revenue, right? Because that's what a lot of dry van carriers do, right? If they don't typically haul produce, if you will, they'll go in because it's paying so much more. So they'll gain that profitability for that month or whatever it is. And then they come out and it's a little bit of boost for their company, right?
Yeah. And the other thing too, is that, when you get a carrier on board, don't get them on board because you're caught between a rock and a hard place to fill a need. If you're going to use them, feed them annually all year round, in the highs and the lows, but keep them on board because they'll come back and they'll say to you, oh, you want me to do this? What have you done for me lately? Take
well, that's a big thing for my reverse engineered logistics.
Yes.
If you're a new salesperson out there, I still hands down think the best thing you can do, or if you're a struggling salesperson right now, go to your top 10 carriers and say, where do you need freight? And just sell for them.
Right. How can I help you? Right. How can I help you? Exactly. That's a great question.
Fill their lanes.
Missing too.
Fill their trucks.
Don't do that, because a lot of the shippers out there think about themselves. But if you just said to them, hey, listen, I'm not sure what lanes you're looking for, but I do many. How can I help you? You've been helping me. Where do you need to go? Maybe I can fulfill that need. We can negotiate. We can start talking, and I'll consolidate my carriers and make that corral a little bit smaller, increase that revenue, increase that discount. There's so many different ways to slay it. But I mean, a lot of guys out there, they don't do that. They just
Jeff, think of it like this, Jeff. So you sit down with your supplier and you say, okay, where do you need freight to and from? Like, give me your triangles. Okay, give me your volumes. How many trucks a week do it? Where do you typically deliver? How long are you unloading?
Yep.
What is the price you need? Now I go armed with all of that information and I call Dean, the shipper. And I say to Dean, I'm here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. I deliver 33 miles from your location. I typically unload at 9 a.m. I'm done by 10. By the time I do my circle check, I could be at your location by, call it 11:30.
Right.
This is my cost. That's my first phone call with Dean. Now, Dean's going to say, this guy knows his shit. Like, he's got people. Even to the point where I've had, and I think one of my headsets just went, I had my drivers stop in. This was, during 2018 when it was like capacity was like, yeah, I have capacity. Yeah, right. You have capacity. I said, listen, I'll have people stop by and just knock on your door for the next 2 weeks. So I paid the carrier $50 each time. So it cost me $300. Driver went and knocked on the door. We got an account that was golden, right? Like there's all these opportunities with seasonality, even with seasonality.
Well, shippers have set sales schedule, especially if they have a lot of volume. So if you're negotiating with the carriers and the carriers tell you that, hey, listen, I'm not there on a Tuesday or a Thursday, but I'll be there on a Monday and Wednesday. Talk to your operations people and see, hey, listen, I got guaranteed capacity on Mondays and Wednesdays, not Tuesdays and Thursday. Can we change the schedule and bring it back a day, and that feeds the carrier. You feed the needs there. You're saving a crap load of money on the backside of that, so there's all different ways. That's why it's so important to understand the operations more than the freight first, so that you can tell your carriers about the operations and see if you can help them out. So there's so many different ways, Dan. You're right.
So Dan, I've got another example, and it gets back to your question when we started the show, which was why do rates in Thanksgiving, increase? And it's got to do with the seasonality that we've been talking about, in particular in the Pacific Northwest. We just had the example of the dry van rates, right? So southbound rates out of Seattle, so northbound rates out of Los Angeles are about triple what they are southbound for a dry van, right? Because of the lane imbalance, because Seattle's a consumer market, a lot of freight goes in from Los Angeles. Because it's fall produce season right now and Christmas trees on longer haul lanes, refrigerated rates are very different. So if I apply that same methodology of southbound, northbound lane balance, a reefer carrier is going to be making $6,000 on the return trip, right? $6,000 total. So dry van 4,500. A reefer carrier is going to be pulling in about $6,000 for that week. His trip's going to be about $2.60 a mile for all miles. But the important thing is that the northbound, southbound lanes are very balanced in terms of the rate per mile. So because of fall produce season, you've only got to run 4 hours, 180 miles over the mountain to Yakima Valley and the Columbia River Basin and load straight back down to San Francisco, Stockton, Los Angeles. So for reefer carriers, capacity is much tighter in Seattle than it is for dry vans, because there's a lot more seasonality in that market for refrigerated carriers. And that will flow over to all of the flatbed carriers that are loading pine trees with helicopters, bringing them in, dropping them on their trailers this week and next week. So, capacity is very different depending on both equipment type and region. And we've been talking about, to use Jeff's rotisserie chicken analogy, which is brilliant, that's what you've got to understand if you're buying capacity. It's not just so much about the rate per mile. It's about, you've got to widen your aperture and think about what's the, Daman will be able to attest to this. He looks at, probably some KPIs. He looks at a revenue per truck week or miles per truck week or things like that. There's targets he's got to hit each week in terms of productivity. Lane balance is a big component of that. Just like rate per mile is a component, just like how many hours you spend on a loading dock is a huge component, because that could mean on these longer haul lanes, that could mean the difference between getting out of, going into Seattle and out of Seattle same day, or being held overnight and then getting back too late for Saturday. You've got to take your 34-hour restart. Next thing, you can't come out till Monday. All that sort of stuff goes on. Carriers have very dedicated cycles that they need to work on. If you look at Hart Transportation, Jeff, a lot of those guys work, 5 days a week, 2 days on, 5 on, 2 off, maybe 6 on, 1 off, but they're home every weekend. Like a lot of these guys from these regional towns have to get home every weekend, because that's why they drive trucks in those regional areas. It's a great lifestyle for a lot of guys who can, drive a longer haul, make a good wage, do the same trip. Drivers love familiarity, same route, same lane, same customers, good customer service. And then they're back home Friday night for a good weekend of partying.
Yep. And then they do it all over again, and they know exactly what they're doing every week. It's not a, they become friends, they become acquainted. Like everybody knows each other. They know, they know Jeff's coming in on Monday and Dean's coming in on Tuesday and Dan's coming in on Thursday.
Safer. You're much safer too.
Right? You're building a relationships, and they'll bend over backwards. I know plenty of drivers that used to bend over backwards for me. If I asked them to do me a favor, they would do it because they knew we took care of them, got them in and got them out ASAP, and that's what every single driver looks for. Every single one out there, because it takes money out of their pocket if they're held up. So,
but what Dean brought up a good point, right? Getting off a dock quick, getting out of the city, and one little ripple in that pond creates them to be in a position they don't want to be in for the 34-hour reset. As a broker, as a carrier sales, like if you're on a carrier side selling, these are all things we really need to understand in order to help manage that supply chain better. Because you guys remember 7 months ago, we were talking about, we got a truck shortage. And Dean said, I don't think we got a truck shortage. I think we got an issue with too many trucks sitting on docks for too long and trailers being used as storage and all this. We didn't really have a truck problem because we see it right now. And we know based on this year, there wasn't 4 million new trucks put into the market. Like to get trucks off the line was even difficult this year. So that the volume of new trucks coming into the market has been very low compared to most years, but there's a huge capacity issue now, or overcapacity now. And it's always been there. I think shippers are getting smarter because I think carriers are starting to charge. And they're starting to say, hey, you can't keep me for 6 hours.
Yeah, you know what? They really should. The drivers have the upper hand. Carriers really do have the upper hand. If they all got on the same page and they said, you know what, we're tired of this, we're losing money. And they said layover charges, instead of like $250, they said it's $1,000. Everybody said it's $1,000. That's going to stop dead in its tracks, because nobody's going to pay that money, and they're not going to get their deliveries. It's like being held hostage. But there's a lot of ways, I hate to say it, but if carriers wanted to go and do that, they could, and if they all got on the same page, not one carrier, because they're going to lose their shirts. But if everybody did, they would put a stop.
It's like you remind me of Chris Rock's old stand-up. He says, you don't need gun control, you need bullet control. Charge $1,000 every bullet. You won't have any innocent bystanders. You know what I mean? He goes, and it's true. I mean, and that is a very convoluted, and I don't even know why I just brought that up. But
it's funny. I mean, it's sad and it's funny.
But it's totally like that was bad.
I know, but it's sad because shippers, they really take advantage of the drivers out there. They really, really do.
Some do.
A lot of them
are very
conscientious,
aware of what drivers have to actually go through.
But it's also seasonal too, right? It's also it's a little bit. Well, it's probably more than seasonal. It's a bit like we've been in a hard insurance market because capacity disappeared. A lot of underwriters lost their shirts, so money evaporated from the market. Insurance companies didn't have a lot of capital to underwrite fleets. It's starting to turn a little bit now. It's the same thing when it comes to capacity. I've tracked ELD data for decades in this country, and there's a definite correlation between how loose capacity is and how long you sit on a dock. If you go back, remember 2018, early 2018, I was looking at ELD data, and their capacity was very tight in the first 8 months of 2018. Shippers couldn't show enough love for carriers, and they couldn't get them on and off their docks fast enough. 2019, different story. Capacity loosened, carriers sat around a lot. So there's this bigger, it's probably not seasonality, but it's kind of, it ebbs and flows depending on how loose or tight capacity is. That's sort of the big macro picture that you've got to also watch right now. Carriers know it. They know that they go anything to do with food, they're going to sit. It's going to take forever, especially live loads, floor load, live load stuff. That's always going to come at a premium.
Always. They sit on the I won't mention the warehouses, but they give them an appointment at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they may get to them at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Isn't it? And that's a whole day, right? So in carrier terms, there's $1,200 to $1,500 opportunity cost right there.
And they're not paying $1,200 or $1,500 more for freight. That's for sure.
Right. Even your detention or demurrage charges are really not going to come anywhere close to what you're going to lose, what your opportunity cost is. So that's we talked about this on the show, but I saw a social media post from a large distribution center in Tracy, California. And the sign was a picture on the internet. The sign said live loads, minimum 7 hours, minimum 7 hours for live loads.
Oh, I did see that.
Yeah. And of course, you could see them prioritizing their inbound, outbound P&D local distribution trucks for all the supermarkets. I get that, but gee, live loads for 7 hours, that's got to be costing.
I'll tell you right now, that's a logistics operations failure on their side. That's what's causing that. That's all internal crap that they don't have a good handle on, and that's what causes that to happen. If they did and they had their crap together, that dock would flow. And they would know exactly what they're doing. But guess what? If it's not broken, why fix it? They just think it's the norm. So they operate at the same inefficient.
Well, and carriers will keep picking up there, and they'll keep dealing with the 7 hours. Like everything in life,
really good
we control the narrative. Everything in life, right? Like you look at when capacity loosens, right? And there's a ton of capacity. I remember vividly from day one, people in the companies I worked for would be like, somebody will take it, and on the phone going, no, it's $300. Well, I know it's usually $600, but it's $300. Okay, no problem. And the phones are lit up, and finally somebody says, okay, I'll take it for $300. Like we do it to ourselves. We're always doing it to ourselves. Drivers, brokers, the ones that the certain companies that we know drive rates to the ground bottom as low as the snake's belly button, and then try and kick it deeper. We know there's companies out there that do that. And people take the freight because they need to get home, or at least I'll pay for fuel and I won't keep a driver stuck there over the weekend. And that's the industry.
Yeah, Dan, there's always a risk in doing that if you're going for the cheapest load, because you're not going to get the big hitters out there. You're not going to get the top 10 carriers in the country that go.
No, because they're already pre-booked coming home anyways. They don't. They're not looking for that freight.
Right. I'm just saying. So, I mean, do you really want to take that risk in the food industry when you think about it? And if you're using reefers, and I mean, what kind of characters are you going to get in there because you're looking at that and it's just like, hey, I'm not taking crap. If you want to move my freight, I got the upper hand. You're going to sit there until I feel, I want to offload you. It's terrible. It's
we used to call them Cracker Jack loads because you never knew what kind of surprise you'd get in the box. Yeah. I mean, we used to sit there and go, oh God, another Cracker Jack load. And you're waiting for it because it's going to happen. Like it's like as a broker, when you choose that carrier, maybe the customer's tight, maybe numbers are tight, maybe you're trying to make something work and you're like, oh, I've never dealt with that person before. They're $300 cheaper than everyone else, but you're like, okay, let's go for it. Let's just try it. You don't sleep that night.
No way.
You're lying there going, is my friend even going to make it? Do I have a lawsuit on my hands tomorrow?
Why did I do this? Why did I do this?
There's those seasons as well, because that's a season in freight as well, Dean. Capacity tightening and loosening.
Oh my God!
Right? And you have all these seasons that stack on top of each other.
I got a question for Jeff. So I don't know whether we're at the tail end of RFP season, but we have to be some way through it. One of the trends we've seen on our side is rates are coming down on the contract side in the order of 8 to 12% still compared to rates last year for contract loads. So for those new to the industry, remember contract loads represent about 90% of the loads being moved at the moment, 10% on spot. The rates that Jeff's working on with his customers right now for contract loads are the rates that loads will be moved at all of next year on a repetitious basis. Our forecasters are thinking that late Q1, early Q2 is when rates will start to turn. By that, I mean they will continue to decrease at the rate they're decreasing. We're still looking at rates being higher than where they were in previous years, that low point. So, Jeff, I'm wondering what trends are you seeing with your shippers that you're negotiating with as they go to carriers looking for rates?
Yeah, there's two things that come to mind. First of all, a lot of those forecasts and budgets have already been created for next year, right? Because we're deep into the fourth quarter right now, okay?
Yep.
The CPG companies out there, especially the Japanese companies, their fiscal year ends on March 31st. So they have a little bit more time to do the RFPs, especially in the CPG industry, if you are indeed dealing with a Japanese company. Secondly, a lot of these companies are growing exponentially, and they're creating new buildings and new DCs, and a lot of them are going to be opening up the first of the year. So a lot of these RFPs, I have 2 of them that are building a new building in Southern California, but they will do an RFP at that time once the facility is up and ready to go. And that's going to be probably in the first quarter. So I'm working on something.
They haven't asked you for any insight on
they don't know
shipping out of the new facility or anything?
Yeah, not yet, because they're working on many different things. But one thing I do know right now as it stands is that we're not looking at long-term contractual RFPs. We're looking for very short-term, because the market is so volatile and changing, and we can't really predict what the FSC is going to do over the next several months. Right now, in New Jersey, we're seeing a few cents dropping, and then all of a sudden it goes up. I mean, we talk about seasonality, right? Every time the summer comes, you always see those fuel prices start rising, right? And then when it comes down off the season, you see them come down. So they're bouncing all over the place. So
really? Because up here, it's kind of like weekly. Every weekend, fuel goes up. The season is, if you don't fuel up before the weekend, you pay more.
Well, yeah, and it's bouncing still up and down, and I see it all the time. But the thing is that it's just not sustainable. You know, I've already been asked from one of my customers, you know, to reduce cost on lanes, because he knows what the market's doing. You know, we deal with transparency, and it's almost like the cost plus, Dan, that we talked about several months ago. And, you know, there's no hidden cost. They know exactly what it is, and it kind of works that way. Now, for a lot of other brokers out there, it may not. You know, it's a choice, 2 choices, right? That you can take whichever path that you want. So some customers might work, some other customers it won't. But it's really all over the place, Dean, to answer your question. So
interesting.
I don't know what other ones are doing out there, but I'm just seeing it on what's being asked of me. You know, so we're working on many different things, and even a high risk opportunity right now where it
actually makes sense to do mini RFPs for like 90 days and then go back. So like you do one big RFP, you get your core group of carriers, as long as they operate, and you do like a mini one every 90 days with that core group, right? Cut costs down, don't go back out to the market. But it allows you also, after 90 days, if carrier A is not performing, maybe carrier B can step into that. And I would think, I mean, at 90 days is a good, if you look at the data, Dean, that we look at every week, and if you go back through our shows, every 90 days, there seems to be a shift, a bigger shift than most. And
seasonality, the 4 seasons.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing
see how I brought that back?
You know,
I meant to do that.
The other thing too is this: the way that I communicate and collaborate with everyone is like, listen, I know that rate is low, so this is what I'm going to do. I'll bring you in at this. We're going to follow the market. We're going to see how the market is moving. If there's a huge adjustment that needs to be made, I'm going to have that conversation with you. I'm going to have that conversation with the shipper. I'm going to say, listen, we did the contract at 42% fuel. It's dropped. Okay, so we're going to reduce those costs. I'll reduce them, you know. However, if the fuel increases or the market changes, we're going to have another sit down and we're going to adjust it. And you tell the carrier that, so he knows that, you know, that contracted rate of 2,000 isn't from January to December, right? That will adjust accordingly as the market changes, as contract changes, because we all know when the spot drops, it kind of pulls those contracted rates down. So things have to be adjusted, and it's the right way of doing the business, at least on my approach, you know.
I used to say 5%. If things shifted over 5% each way, we would have a conversation. Because if it shifts 1 or 2 for like 2 weeks, you don't want to have that conversation, right? So I would say, listen, if something shifts for over 2 weeks at 5%, then we'll have a conversation. Either way, if the prices go up, I'm not coming to you.
Right. When the RFP, let's go back several years, right? When we knew that season was coming in, the peak was what it was and everything, right? At the beginning of the year on the contractual agreements, right? You wouldn't, on RFPs, you would stabilize a rate that would carry you from January all the way through peak season. As you know, rates start climbing in peak season, capacity starts getting tighter. So you pay a little bit more up front, and then it kind of balances itself through the peak season. So you have a level contracted rate that covers you that way. You know, it's not like, yeah, we'll give you cheap rates in January when it's really down. And then when it comes to October 1st, we're going to jack it up by $750. No, get that thing. And it's like an even keel, but you got to watch the market because it's going to go, and you want to take that nice level approach to it when you're doing those contracts. At least that's what I did. And it worked kind of well.
100%. Think back to a year ago, Jeff. People were doing mini bids, short-term bids, because they couldn't find capacity. A year later, they're doing mini bids because there's too much capacity, and that's why you've got to watch shows like this and understand broader market context, so you understand how to price in things like seasonality, macroeconomic factors, supply, demand. It's much more than just a rate negotiation these days. And we just lost Jeff. Whoa, you jinxed him. Oh, he's back.
Yeah, no. It's like clockwork. Every show, Jeff disappears on us. Jeff, and here's the thing is, in speaking with a lot more salespeople,
right?
There's a lot of shippers out there that, when it was tough, they took on more suppliers. Right, beginning of this year, they took on more suppliers to meet their supply chain, and here's one big thing for all you sales reps out there. Just, you need to pay attention to this. Now they feel, okay, well, you really helped me when I was stuck. Now I don't have enough freight to keep you all busy. So they're giving pieces to try and keep everyone happy, because the shippers now are, it's, and I don't want to make it sound like they never knew, but they understand the power of relationships now over the last couple of years. Right. It's really taken its toll. So that comment where, you know what, you sound like you got everything, but I don't have enough freight to keep my own guys busy right now that were kind of there during the rough times. You're going to hear it.
Yep.
You're going to have to come up with a balance for it, something to kind of show the juxtaposition there, because you're going to hear it a lot. And that's actually a good thing. And I say that because that means shipper loyalty is coming back, right?
Preferred shipper.
Yeah, and if you're in with these shippers, that's great. If you're just getting in, just remember, it's just keep going. Just keep going. Just keep going. Just keep making the calls. You're going to be one of those in people in a very short period of time. And if you've gotten out of sales for 6 or 8 months and you're back in sales, it's a totally different world. So just understand that. Just keep doing that. Now, I know, Dean, you had something that you wanted to kind of bring out to everybody today and share with everybody. And I think it's super powerful. And I love that you're going to do this.
Yeah, I hope it's okay to mention the war. That's a Faulty Towers reference from 1975 with John Cleese, for those that are fans of the British comedy show. That mentioned that.
I'll fight in your general direction.
Yeah. Good old Monty.
Monty Python.
Gotta love it.
Era. So a friend of mine lives in South Florida, a refugee from Ukraine, from the war, former truck driver. Asked the question, do you know anybody here in the US that's hiring drivers from where I'm from, the Ukraine, and with driving experience? And I said, I don't know anybody specifically, but I did want to sort of aim this question at Daman. I know a lot of Canadian carriers have a lot of minority groups on their books. They're equipped to handle a lot of the visa requirements. But for any carriers or anybody listening for that matter that's in the US and knows of anybody that is looking for drivers, A, but B, willing to take on drivers from overseas that are refugees from the Ukraine, would they please, contact us somehow? Maybe through Dan, just drop us a note. Let us know if you've got a connection. I'd love to hear from Daman what his advice is, and anybody in general.
Great. Yeah, DM
Thanks
me,
for that,
DM
man.
Dean. My pleasure, man. And you know what? It's I met a young gentleman in a grocery store a couple of weeks ago, and he, I used to coach him in hockey, and he says, "No, I drive truck now." And I'm like, "You do?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Good for you, man." And I was like, "Awesome." Did it. And I swear people stopped as if I was like screaming, "I've got malaria" or something in the middle of the grocery store. They're like, and I remember one guy looking at me going, "Dude, you got pretty excited about the fact that he's a truck driver." I go, "Yeah." I go, "Everything you have in your hand is because of him."
Yeah.
And he just kind of stopped and went, "Wow, I never thought of it like that." And I went, and the kid's 22 years old. I'm like, "This is awesome. Good for you." And he's happy with it. So definitely.
Not many do, Dan. That's the thing.
Wow, we've done it as an industry, Jeff. We've done a shit job of marketing truck driving as a solid career.
Agree.
Let's face it.
I agree. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Right. Everybody takes it for granted that the things that we use just came up from osmosis or something like that.
And it's always been you don't have a high school education, you got one tooth, you got, like there's all these stereotypes that go. I know it's stupid. There's all these stereotypes that go with being a truck driver. Right? Like you remember, because I remember when I first got into it, most of the truck drivers were white. They had a mustache and they had a smoke stain from always holding their cigarette up their mustache. Like it was just what I always saw. And maybe it was the companies I was at that just had those drivers. And then immigrants come to the country and they're like, "Well, sure, I'll drive truck. Why not?" Like it's a great, they get put food on the table for their family, and it's not that there's not that stigma. And I think we've lived in that era for too long. Like to me, truck driving is a solid career. It's a great career. Now, maybe it's a better career for a single younger individual than somebody with a family who wants to be at home every night. But again, companies are making it possible with all the regional stuff to be home every night. It's an amazing career. And it's a career that can give you such, like Daman just put on this beautiful party for his drivers.
Yeah. Last Friday.
Last Friday. And the stuff he was giving them for 5 years to say, like, just the recognition, the congratulations, like, that's what we need. Right? Like, that's what we need more of that in our industry. And then things will change. But this industry, this, I'm a grade 9 dropout. Logistics has given me everything I've ever wanted in life.
Right.
And it's because I adopted and I leveled up my skill every step of the way. And these are what drivers are doing. You look at all these driver fitness coaches. Drivers are no longer diabetes and overweight and there's all types of drivers now. There's some drivers that are more jacked than most Mr. Olympians. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's a great career. Never mind a job. It's a great career.
And
I just wish that we would do a better job as an industry getting people into.
Let's thank, and I believe Dean will agree with me. Let's thank JB Hunt back in the 80s, who started this regional, super regional, give their drivers the opportunity to be home with their families, and then it took off like wild, and all the other carriers started jumping on board and doing the exact same thing. So thanks to JB Hunt for doing that and thinking about their drivers and making things happen.
I'd like to see. Yeah, I'd like to see more of what we call I don't know what you call it here. We call it, maybe it's a turn. We call it a changeover in Australia. Most of the freight moves in Australia doing changeovers where you'll do long haul freight, but you'll meet halfway with the slip seat. Well, it's more, you'll meet halfway between two long haul destinations, swap trailers and go back home. You'll be
swap trailers. Okay,
yeah. So I just don't think we do enough of that. There's plenty of areas to actually do the physical changeovers these days. All you need to do is have two drivers paired up and let them run it. Let them call each other and say, "Hey, I'm leaving, you're leaving, we're going to meet at this spot at this time." It works beautifully. I loved it in Australia. I could bang out 1,000 kilometers what's that, 680 miles. I could bang out 680 miles every single night and be home in bed the next morning. I was knackered, though, by the end of the week because you're banging out a lot of miles overnight. But that's the thing about trucking, right? A lot of it goes on while we're all asleep. And you made a point a minute ago, Jeff, that made me think that every one of my Amazon packages that I'm getting delivered now, even though my wife's put me on a shopper's hold because I've been out of control. I had to Google what's a shopper's hold because she said, "You're on a shopper's hold." She said, "You're on a shopper's hold, dude, because you're out of control." Because you order all this stuff.
Go to your corner.
Yeah.
We're canceling the internet.
My memory's so bad. I order stuff. Oh my God. My memory's so bad. I order stuff and forget about it. So when it turns up, it's like a surprise. So it's like every day's a birthday. but here's
one.
Yeah, I always wanted one of those. I don't know why.
What did I order today? But here's the thing: it comes out of Allentown, PA. It's 300 miles overnight. I can order it tonight or this afternoon. It'll be here in the morning. But some truck drivers had to overnight out of Allen, PA, through New York traffic, and be here and then turn and burn and go back home. It's a tough
Dean,
job.
I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. You ordered it yesterday and it shows up today, and you forget that you ordered it yesterday.
Yeah.
So I think there's another problem that's coming, that's sliding in here somewhere. I could be wrong.
No clue. Well, so this extends to movies. I could watch a movie today and forget it tomorrow. My wife says we're watching a movie. She says, "You've seen this 10 times." I said, "No, I haven't." And so I can watch movies over and over. I have a short-term working memory issue. That's why I've got to write things down a lot. See, I've got to write stuff down.
My wife and I do that. My wife and I have been watching a movie, and we'll be like a half hour in. I'll be like, "Have we seen this before?" And she's like, "Yeah, I think we have." I'm like, "Damn, it was a really good movie."
He's talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark.
But you know what? Those types of movies I always remember, right? Because what do you think of when you hear Raiders of the Lost Ark? Indiana Jones running down that aisle with the big ball, and the big ball that should be going like 200 kilometers an hour is going like 2 kilometers an hour because just the movie's so old back in the day.
Yeah.
So, Dean, thank you for sharing that, and to everybody watching and listening again. If you got anyone down in that Florida area, DM Dean, DM myself, DM Jeff. We'll get you in touch with who you need to get in touch with.
Absolutely.
And December 13th. Save the date. DJ said it is going to be a blast, and let me tell you, it is going to be a riot, man. It's going to be a beaut. To all of you out there, have a wonderful day. Thank you again to Daman and Centurion Trucking and American Logistics. Remember, if you know anyone in the industry that can use the information we talked about today, send this to them. Like, subscribe, hit the ding dong bell, whatever the thing is, wherever it is on your screen right now. I don't know where it is because I don't know where you're watching from. But make sure you get notified when we go live, because we go live Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. till 9:30, 9:45, 10, whenever we kind of feel like hanging up. See you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
See everybody.
Take care.
Centurion Trucking, our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking and start designing your career